Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Miso braised beef. That's right, when the weather turns cold and the days grow shorter, the one thing I crave, besides warmer weather and longer days, is some good old-fashioned warming from the inside out comfort food. And while these recipes tend to be classics that we make the same way every time, there's no reason we can't tweak a few of the ingredients to maybe make something a little more interesting and unusual. And that is exactly what I attempted to do here, and I think very successfully. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by seasoning some beef. And what you're seeing here is a few pounds of beef chuck, which is a wonderful cut to braise. And I'm going to go ahead and season it very generously with kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, and cayenne. And you can, if you want, just use chunks of beef, as long as they're about the same thickness. And the only reason I'm using strips is because the butcher was selling these as boneless beef country ribs, which I'm pretty sure is not actually a thing. But anyway, long story short, this was actually $1 cheaper a pound than the regular chuck. So that's what I'm going with. But any braisable beef will work. But anyway, what we'll do once that's seasoned is go ahead and sear this over high heat in some fresh peanut oil. And if you're wondering what that is, it's literally the oil that you get at the top of a jar of peanut butter. Okay, when you open a fresh jar of the real stuff, you should have about 2 or 3 tablespoons of this stuff at the top. And this clear peanut oil is amazing to fry in. So I went ahead and added a couple tablespoons into this pan, set over high heat, in which we will brown our beef. And by the way, if you haven't recently purchased a big jar of peanut butter, you can just use regular vegetable oil or olive oil for this. But no matter what you use, we're going to want to brown this very well on high heat, ideally on all 4 sides, which is going to take you a few minutes. And of course, while you're waiting for that to happen, you can always prep your other ingredients. And one of those items I want to highlight here are these gorgeous large king trumpet mushrooms, which are pretty much 100% edible. And for this recipe to prep these, all we're going to do is cut them in half. And yes, any fresh mushroom will work for this. So if you can't find these, no worries. But if you can, try to use them. They're really good. And look super cool. So we can go ahead and prep those among other things while our meat's browning. And then once we do have our meat browned to our liking, we'll go ahead and remove that from the pan. And we will actually turn off the heat for a minute and let the pan cool down a little bit. And also add a nice big chunk of butter. And as soon as that butter melts, we'll turn the heat back on to medium. And then place our mushrooms in cut side down. Oh, and if you want to burn yourself, just throw them in like this with your hands, so the butter splashes up. Or if you don't want to burn yourself, use some tongs. But anyway, we'll toss those mushrooms in and cook them over medium heat for about 3 or 4 minutes until they start to lightly brown. At which point we'll flip them over and give the other side a couple minutes. At which point those can be removed to the same plate as our meat. And by the way, if you're getting concerned about how dark the pan's getting, don't be. That is as intentional as it is necessary. And fair warning, it's going to get worse. Because what we'll do at this point is toss in a diced onion, along with a big pinch of salt, and we'll cook those for 3 or 4 minutes until they start to take on some color as well. And I know it's hard to believe, especially if you don't cook a lot, but all that charred goodness at the bottom, which our French friends call a fond, is not only going to give our braise a beautiful deep brown color, but it's also going to add a tremendous amount of flavor. And no, it does not taste burnt, as you will find out when you make this. But anyway, after we've sautéed our onions for a few minutes, we will go ahead and stir in a little bit of wine. And I'm using sake here, but just a plain old white wine will work. And what's going to happen as we stir that around is all that incredible goodness from the bottom is going to be released from the pan and basically form the foundation of our sauce. So we will go ahead and stir that in. And it's going to evaporate fairly quickly. But before it does, we want to add the rest of our ingredients, which will include about 3 tablespoons of yellow miso, or as I would have called it, golden miso, but nobody asked me. And then we'll also want to do a couple tablespoons of maple syrup. And no, you may not substitute pancake syrup for this. All right, please throw that stuff away and get some maple syrup. And then after that, we will also do a little bit of ketchup, as well as a nice big splash of chicken stock or broth, or if times are tough, some water would work. And that's it. We'll go ahead and stir that all together. And then as soon as that comes back to a simmer, we can go ahead and add our brown pieces of beef back in, along with, of course, our king trumpet mushrooms. And as always, any and all accumulated juices. All right, those have to be added back in. All right, you don't put those back in, we cannot be friends. And that's it. Once everything's back in, all we're going to do is cover this and let it cook on low to medium-low heat for about 2 to 3 hours or until our meat is tender. And while we don't want a rolling boil, We do want a bit of a simmer, so adjust your heat if necessary. So it's sort of bubbling like this. And about halfway through, after about maybe an hour or so, I generally like to give the meat a flip, just to sort of see how things are going. And if it looks like things are drying out, I will add another splash of broth. But this was looking just about perfect. So I went ahead and covered it back up and continued cooking on low to medium low for about another hour and a half, or until our meat is fork tender. And how we will test this to make sure it's fork tender is with not spoon, fork, and a spoon. And we really do want that fork to slide in pretty easily. Okay, we don't want this falling apart, but we do want it very tender. And if your meat is fork tender like mine was, we will move into final production, which means drizzling in about a tablespoon of the vinegar of your choice for a little bit of sharpness to balance our rich, savory, and a little bit sweet flavors. And then speaking of sharpness, we will also toss in a little bit of sliced green onion and thinly sliced hot chili peppers, or sweet if you want. That's up to you. I mean, you are after all the Uncle Buck of your miso braised chuck, so use what you like. And that's it. What we'll do once all that's been stirred in is cover this back up and cook it for just 5 more minutes, at which point, theoretically, it should be ready to serve. But we don't know for sure until we taste it and adjust the seasoning. Right, might need a little touch of salt, or if you prefer, a little bit of soy sauce. But I determined mine was just right, so I went ahead and served mine up on some mashed potatoes, next to some roasted Romanesco. And for the record, this would be just as magnificent over some rice or noodles. But personally, mashed potatoes are my favorite for this. Oh, and if everything's gone according to plan, when we spoon them up, our mushrooms should look just like pieces of hot dog. Oh yeah, so pretty. But anyway, I went ahead and finished up with some sliced green onion. And that's it, our miso braised beef is ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, was just like a fall flavor festival in a bowl. Right, just very, very savory, and just a little bit sweet, and a little bit salty, and a little bit tangy, and a little bit country, and a little bit rock and roll. And by the way, the knife is not for the beef. It's to cut through those glorious mushrooms, which are just such incredibly effective sponges soaking in all this flavor. And yes, it does help if you cut all the way through. There we go. And please believe me when I say, those mushrooms were as good, if not better, than the actual beef. I mean, just incredible. In fact, I think I just inadvertently showed how to make a world-class vegetarian entree, if you did it without the beef and just use all King Trumpet mushrooms. Or if you have connections, porcini, which if you don't are like $30 a pound. And yes, I was a little bit stingy with the sauce, so I'm going to add a little more. So to recap, the sauce was tremendous, the beef was exquisite, and the mushrooms sublime. And really, my only regret here was not working in any miso puns. So for that, I will say, miso sorry. But anyway, that's it, where we're calling miso braised beef, whether you do it with the beef and the mushrooms, or just the mushrooms, or just the beef. I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.